Outside the windows of the kitchen, I could see the summer rain dripping from the leaves of the flower bushes. It was that clear, shining species of shower which can seem so alive and warm compared to the steel gray rains of winter and fall. The comfort of this scene was quickly shattered as I noticed the encroaching shadows rising from the corners of my home's wood-paneled walls. The realization that I was not alone crept into my being as a slow-growing anxiety in the pit of my stomach. "It's here again," I thought, and no sooner had the words formed in my mind than I saw the dark shape dart through the dim light, crossing from one familiar shadow to another. It was at home in the shadows, you see. It lived in darkness as a fish lives in water. It only crawled to even the dimmest of light to hunt. I had seen it first as it grabbed my cat Salvador and pulled him hissing and screaming into the shadow. There had been a quick snap, and Salvador's protest had ended, and no further sign of my beloved pet was ever seen again. It had seemed small then, a tiny thing really, and no real threat to a creature of my size. However, gradually as I witnessed its intrusion more and more, I was certain that it was growing. Its violations grew bolder as it made its presence more and more bold and invasive. I felt it cross my legs as I lay in bed, and was shocked by the sharp grid of its many appendages and the increased weight which they supported. I guess it might be the size of a small terrier by now. What damage a creature that size, with such strength and ferocity, could inflict on a defenseless being such as I, should it dare to attack? The thought had me envisioning nothing less than mandibles ripping through flesh like a chainsaw. That night, it leapt onto the center of the kitchen table and stood in the moonlight, which shone through the windows from over the sink. I was terrified, crouching there and watch its glazed, shining metallic black armor staring at me with its bulbous black spherical eyes. It was making sound like a child whispering, and for a moment I felt taunted and wondered if it was not challenging me. However, it just slowly crawled backwards into the darkness, and it was gone. It had gotten to the point that so familiar was I with its presence that I could predict its arrival by its scent, damp, mildewed earth and moldy forest wood. When pets from the neighborhood began to go missing, I was sure of the culprit. Then, when a repairman disappeared, I was horrified. In my mind's eye, I could see the man being dragged into the darkness, kicking and screaming, much the way that Salvador had been. It must be so strong now, I thought with terror. This means that it had expanded its territory and extended its reach out into the world. I was certain, though, that my home was the portal, the shadows of my walls its gate. The darkness there was like a crack in the floor of time and space, where something sinister had crept through. It had needed no grand incident. I had chanted no spells and uttered no incantations. It had taken only time and the wearing erosion of a particularly corrosive agent. My own misery, my angst, my despair had burned away like a radiation at the frail wall between my world and the creature's, and it had come through, a larva. It had wriggled into a shadow womb and fed gradually on my darker emotions until finally, kicking from its cocoon, it had freed itself. I was like a warm little son of misery to this unwanted guest, and it had made my home its nest, and from this base of its operations, its nocturnal activities fanned out across the town. People were disappearing from their beds and never seen or heard from again. One night, I saw it bound across the yard, resembling nothing so much as some titanium scurrying scarab. I resolved that, should I see it again so clearly, I would be prepared to harm it. The following day, I armed myself with a machete and a rifle which I borrowed from my uncle. Even as I cleaned the barrel, I shuddered to imagine the creature turning on me in attack. There would be no way I would survive would it come to that. However, at this point, I felt I could not live another day in shame of being this murderous thing's host. After waiting several nights without incident, I came to find it hunched in the hallway before me, a challenge, obviously. It had somehow suspected my motives and was now mocking my intentions to kill it. I had reached for the rifle, where I had lain it by the coat rack, but was stunned to find the barrel bent and chewed. Then there came that insane whispering and the child voice mumbling before it disappeared. I awakened the next morning to find that I had been locked in my room. I spent the day trying to break the door, which seemed to have hardened into unnatural durability. The windows themselves would not shatter either. I lay weeping as the dusk fell, and I jumped with horror as objects struck my leg from the corner. I rolled over to see that apples, oranges, and canned goods were rolling from the darkness to my feet. A sudden clamoring announced the introduction of the old manual can opener from my bottom kitchen drawer. I was being fed. Weeks passed as the stink of my own filth filled the room with a constant, heavy foulness which added to my increasingly daily madness. I beat at myself, scratched and chewed at my own flesh, then watched with amusement as the wounds became infected. By the following month, I was quite ill and feverish by the time it finally made its appearance. I lay coughing and mad with sickness as it stared at me with confusion, as if it could not fathom this behavior from its caged pet. And then from the darkness I heard a click, the sound of a door becoming unlocked. It was the darkest hour of night as I crawled to the door and pushed it open. Looking out into the blackness, I pulled myself up onto the corner of the dresser and stepped foot outside of my bedroom for the first time in months. There was no floor to catch that foot as it fell. It sank into emptiness, and caught off balance, I fell and plummeted into a depth as eternal as night itself. The depth seemed bottomless until finally I saw a multitude of gleaming forms as numerous as drops of rain in a storm stretched out in an endless expanse below. My ears were filled with the joined, horrifying sound of millions of whispering childlike voices and murmurs rising like a cloud of noise from below. I fell into them and immediately sank into their mass as I felt the first encroaching prodding of the oncoming feeding frenzy. I thought of the creature which had invaded my life with its presence, and at last realized its motive and mission. I could have laughed had I not been screaming with terror and pain as I envisioned a mother bird ripping worms from the soil of some freshly mowed yard, taking the squirming creature into her throat and carrying it away to her nest.